welcome. Thanks, everybody. I'm gonna just run through a lot of data in the next 15 minutes about New Palo Alto. So again, a kind of refresher, what is New Palo Alto? It's a leading global supercluster of European ecosystems and research hubs. And it starts with kind of London and Paris, which is about a 2-hour train ride. There are almost no two major tech ecosystems that are this close to each other. Not even San Francisco and Cupertino are this close to each other. And then if you expand the horizon just a little bit, you end up with this supercluster that has places like Oxford, Cambridge, Bristol, but also like the Northern Triangle, Amsterdam, where I'm from, Eindhoven, Leuven, Wageningen, which is like a food tech, one of the major food tech ecosystems in the world. So all that is very exciting. And lastly, I think it's important to frame this not as a competitor to the rest of Europe, but as a facilitator to Europe and EMEA. So I'm just going to run through, that was just a kind of refresher, run through the numbers from the perspective of scale, its uniqueness, and finish off with the challenges. So just in terms of absolute scale, so New Palo Alto represents about 45% of Europe's startup ecosystem, measured by VC investment or by number of unicorns. So you can see at the bottom, London, then Paris, then Amsterdam, and then kind of the rest of NPA. What's also interesting is if you look at it more from kind of the whole startup journey from left to right, so about 30% of new bootstrap startups are based in NPA. All the way to the right, about 40% of all decacorns. And so New Palo Alto has produced about 200 unicorns and 14 decacorns. And so those were created 10, 20, some 30 years ago, like ARM. And now this new generation of startups is really able to compete on a global scale. They start with much better circumstances. And if you look at kind of the total value created, there's been about 1.4 trillion in value, of which, if you look all the way at the right, decacorns in New Palo Alto are worth about 400 billion. Those are mostly public companies, so those are kind of actual values right now, representing 46% of the total European ecosystem. Some other interesting facts is that 7 out of the top 10 investors are based in New Palo Alto. A lot of them here in London, but also in Paris. So that's kind of on the European level. So how does New Palo Alto compare on a global scale? So Sol said, stepping out of Silicon Valley's shadow. So we reran the numbers. I think last year New Palo Alto came third. Now it's number 2 by number of unicorns. Although there are also other places like Israel, India also climbing. You could say that, yeah, Beijing and all the places in China have dropped a few places. Another interesting new thing is that New Palo Alto is now the number 1 place for amount of seed capital raised by startups. So overtaking actually the Bay Area. And the reason for that is that, if you look at this cluster combined, you just end up with a lot of startups. Whereas the Bay Area is also obviously very big, but often startups tend to go there in a little bit later in their journey. Another thing where New Palo Alto is number 1 is in the number of university alumni. So here we kind of measure anyone who studied in any of the universities, which there are like many in this supercluster. They've created more startups than any other place in the world, and Boston is the number 2 here. And so if you kind of look at all these numbers together, like end of last year, we did kind of an index to look at all these factors combined to create a ranking. And New Palo Alto is second only to the Bay Area. And you can see that it excels in the green part, which is about university talent. And it excels in the early stage part. And yeah, places like New York City and the Bay Area are still ahead when it's about producing really big companies. And so I'll talk later about why that is. So now talking a bit about what is the uniqueness of this supercluster. And Sol was talking about these new frontiers. So what are those new frontiers? It's things like the future of computing, so from quantum computing, AR, VR, like brain-computer interfaces. It includes climate and impact, synthetic biology, space tech. These are some examples. I think tomorrow I will share some more data around this. And so the thing about kind of deep tech is that like deep tech has been traditionally very hard to finance. And I think what not everybody appreciates is that like a regular startup is almost the complete opposite of it's almost a complete opposite of deep tech. So we'll get the slides back up in a second. So, I mean, if you think about a startup usually, needs to grow fast, wants to look for product market fit, exploits existing technology. It's basically, here we go. It's designed to grow fast. Whereas if you look at kind of R&D, it's about building novel technology. So you have this long cash burn, no revenue for a long time, long feedback cycles. So it goes completely counter to kind of startup best practices. And yet, at the overlap of those two fields, that's where all this frontier tech is happening. And so this really requires a different type of ecosystem that can bring together the virtues of the startup world and ideally people who have been in that environment and who have this kind of sense of urgency and want to search for user feedback. But at the same time, bringing the patience of science and really trying to do, tackle massive global challenges. So you need a different type of ecosystem for that. And this is where I think New Palo Alto is uniquely positioned. Why? Well, it starts already with this, which is kind of just the density of startup ecosystems. There's no place in the world where you have so many startup ecosystems densely together than in Europe, and especially around New Palo Alto, with Belgium kind of being in the middle. But like that triangle is second to no place in the world. Then if you just look at the sheer amount of top-tier universities that are in there, so 8 out of the 10 top universities that produce university spin-outs, that's on the left, are in New Palo Alto. And on the right, you see measured by alumni startups. So these are not necessarily spin-outs, but just students who start a startup. Also 8 out of 10. And you see Oxford, Cambridge at the top, but also places that are maybe less known, like Delft in the Netherlands, Manchester, like London has a bunch of universities, of course. And then if you look at kind of university spin-outs that are created and make it big to like 1 billion in value, but 50% of them are from New Palo Alto. Most of them are in the health space. And actually here, on the one hand, 50% is impressive. But perhaps if you look at the previous slide, 8 out of 10, it should actually be more. So there's way more potential to produce really big spin-outs, and maybe, yeah, this has something to do with with the opportunities that are given to spin out companies at the very, very early stage. So a lot of health tech startups, which is very interesting, and health biotech. And so here we just looked at on the vertical axis biotech investments, so kind of traditional biotech, and on the horizontal axis health tech. And as some of you know, like at this crossover between health tech, biotech, that's where a lot of stuff is happening at the moment. And so you can see kind of 3 cities that really are strong in both, which is Boston, New Palo Alto, and the Bay Area. And so New Palo Alto actually has the same amount of health tech investment as Boston. So it's, in that sense, really well positioned. And that's different than a place like, for example, Basel in Switzerland, which is really strong in biotech but doesn't have the same health tech ecosystem. Here we look at life science patents. So New Palo Alto has almost the same number of life science patents as Boston, and that is because places like Paris, but also London, have a huge pharma industry that can, those kind of companies can help early stage health tech and biotech startups. And if you look at something like immunogenetics, New Palo Alto is actually by far is like way ahead of every other place in the world. And there are other fields where that's the case too. So just gonna finish off in the last few minutes talking about the challenges. There's lots of challenges, too much to talk about, but like going from fragmented markets, lack of capital markets is I think a really big one. Tech transfer, so helping spin-outs, but let's maybe focus on access to late-stage funding. That's one of the most concrete challenges. So here, maybe some of you have seen this slide before. You can see the share of global investment that goes into startups in EMEA and in New Palo Alto. So at the seed stage, the share is almost a third. And for New Palo Alto, 11%, but then it rapidly declines to later stages. So you see the conclusion is this region is massively underinvested for bigger rounds. And another way to look at it, here you can see that where, like, source of funding. So this shows only rounds greater than 40 million. So in New Palo Alto, only 39% of funding is domestic, and all the rest is foreign. A lot of it from the US and from Asia and the rest of the world. So those cap tables are dominated by foreign capital providers. And on the right-hand side, you see the Bay Area, where 82% of the source of capital is domestic. And so they attract some capital also from abroad, but the mix is much healthier. And so, yeah, the current funding environment, of course, doesn't make things easier, especially this breakout and scale-up stage investment, where there was already a shortage. That's where the downturn is the strongest. And yeah, we're sitting on, here you can see dry powder raised by European funds. It's been record amounts, but if you compare it with the US, it's not nearly enough, clearly. So I'm going to share all these numbers online later today. So in conclusion, like, New Palo Alto has nearly all the key ingredients to thrive in this frontier tech age, but some big challenges, and one of the biggest is a lack of late-stage capital. Thank you.